Well, welcome back to Live on Cars. Hope you're all well. Now, in today's episode, something a little bit different. We're not getting the tools out today. We're actually going to be doing a bit of a discussion about winter storage of vehicles. Now, here in the UK, especially in the northern part of the UK, which is where I live, winters can be pretty rubbish. Lots of cold, damp weather, lots of rain. So for that reason, a lot of people take their classic cars off the road for the winter, normally around about the end of October through to sort of March, April time. So what I want to talk about today is long-term storage. So keeping your car stored in a garage for maybe longer than 2-3 months at a time. So I guess there's two things we need to think about. One is the environment. Where's the car being kept? And then secondly, the car itself. What do we need to do to get the car ready for winter storage? So I'm going to share with you my opinions on keeping a car garaged up over winter. And I hope you enjoy the video. Let's get on with it. So I'm lucky enough to have a double garage here where I live, but the garage itself, it's not perfect for a number of reasons which I'm going to go through. So starting off with the environment that the car's kept in. Obviously, if you've got a garage, fantastic, but is the garage dry? Is it temperature controlled? I mean, if I was building a garage from scratch for myself, it would probably be a similar size to this. This is a good size, but it would certainly be a lot better insulated. Insulation is the key. Now, you may have heard about dehumidifiers being used in garages. That's all fine and well if the garage is insulated in the first place. It would be pointless me putting a dehumidifier in my garage, for example, because all it would be doing is it would be probably consuming 2000 watts all the time, plugged in, and it would really struggle to work over the coldest parts of the winter because of the insulation situation. It's fairly simple, really. Basically, the warmer the air that's in the garage, then the less chance of condensation forming. So, once you start to get to about 12 degrees, and for many of us, that's simply not possible with the garages that we currently have. So yeah, if I was designing a garage from scratch, it would certainly have super duper insulated walls, insulated roof, and the doors as well would definitely not be allowing any draft in. And that's one of the major problems with my garage at the moment, is it doesn't have the insulation and it doesn't have the draft-free doors. But at the end of the day, it's still dry and it still serves its purpose for me. So let's just have a quick look at some of the problems with my garage. I think you can see here one of the major problems with mine. I've got quite a big gap underneath this door here on the right hand side of the garage, and that's not ideal when the weather gets really bad outside and it gets really damp and windy and cold in the winter. It's letting a lot of air out, or air in should I say, and it even sometimes lets a bit of water in. But yeah, I mean, it would be great if I could upgrade these doors to proper insulated roller doors, but I just don't have the cash available to do that at the moment. So I have a bit of a solution for this. This is the worst one, as you can see there. It's sort of, the floor tapers off, but I have a bit of a solution for that, which I'll show you now. So yeah, this is my my solution. I've basically cut a piece of wood that fits along there and seals the majority of the drafts out of that particular door. But you can also see, I've got gaps at the top of the doors as well. So I mean, they're never going to seal properly, these doors. So yeah, it'd be pointless for me trying to kind of control the temperature, or if I put a heater in here, I'd just be wasting money. The heat would be going straight out of the gaps around the doors. And apart from the loft being boarded, there's no insulation up there. So yeah. Interestingly, when I moved into this house, the garage half of it had been converted into a room, and they did, all this side was actually properly insulated with plasterboard insulation. Even the roof had been boxed in as well with plasterboard and insulated. So all this you can see here is quite well insulated, but I wanted the big garage, so I took it all down. So to summarise then, basically, if you can keep your garage around about 12 to 14 degrees, then it would probably be worth using a bit of a dehumidifier as well over the winter, maybe on a timer or something like that. But generally speaking, you wouldn't have a lot of moisture problems if you could get your garage to that kind of temperature. That would be the dream scenario. It'd be nice to work in a garage like that over the winter. It's always freezing in my garage. I have to get really wrapped up over the winter if I'm doing any jobs on the car. This garage is detached from the house as well, so it doesn't get any warmth from the house. So yeah, it gets very, very cold in here. But like I say, really I'm lucky that I do have a garage that I can work in. So I have to work with what I've got basically, and it's better than the car being outside. So right, let's get into the actual car itself then. How would you prepare the car for a period of winter storage? So number one, I would certainly recommend using some kind of battery conditioner or battery monitor over the period that your car is stored. Anything more than a couple of weeks for a modern classic, a bit like my Jaguar XK here. These modern classics have a tendency to, because they've got so many computers on board, because they've got lots of electronics that are alive all the time, even when the car's locked, the battery on something like this, and many vehicles of this sort of era, really does start to go down after a couple of weeks. So I always put, I mean the Jaguar does silly things. If the battery gets low, you can get all sorts of warning lights and things like that. So I'd really recommend using some sort of battery monitor. These CTECs are absolutely fantastic, because what this does, as well as charging the battery, when the battery gets full, it then turns off automatically and it monitors the battery. And what it does, if the battery starts to drop a little bit, it then gives it a bit of a wake up. So it sort of says, hello, are you still okay? And it measures the battery voltage, and if it's dropped a little bit, it'll start to charge it a little bit again and start to pulse. And it basically monitors the battery the whole time it's on the vehicle. So it's not constantly charging, which can damage the battery. It's monitoring the battery as well. So I couldn't recommend these anymore. These are fun. They are a little bit expensive. You're probably looking at about 150 to maybe a couple £100, depending on how many features you want. But these are normally great for AGM batteries as well, stop-start batteries, normal flooded batteries as well. They'll even work if you've got a motorbike or something that you want to keep charged. So yeah, I would highly recommend using a CTEC battery monitor. On my Jaguar, the battery is actually in the boot. So I've actually hardwired you can get a kit for the CTEC where you can hardwire to the battery, so you're not messing around with crocodile clips. If you're interested in how I did that, I do have a video in the Jaguar XK playlist on our channel all about hardwiring one of these. But basically, so I have the CTEC on the wall, and if I know this car's going to be parked up for more than a couple of weeks, it goes straight on the CTEC. Just a piece of advice, obviously if you are plugging in something like this, if you're using an extension lead, make sure you completely uncoil the extension lead like I've done. You don't want to run any risk of the extension lead overheating. But other than that, something like the CTEC, it's a quality device. Like I say, you can just leave it on, leave it to do its thing. If you've got a classic car, so something like an Austin Mini or maybe an old Lotus Elan or something like that, chances are, the battery drain of a vehicle like that from the 1970s or even earlier, or sometimes even a bit later, sort of 1980s, those vehicles probably won't lose much charge from the battery over a long period of time. Maybe a little bit, but nowhere near as anything like on a modern classic like this Jaguar. So it depends on the vehicle that you're storing, but certainly yes, if you're storing a modern classic, then it needs to be on a battery monitor, otherwise you'll find that the battery's dead in probably less than 3 to 4 weeks max. On these CTECs you can actually get something called a comfort indicator. Now you might want to look at those. If you've got more than one classic car in your garage, you don't need to buy more than one charger. You can buy these comfort indicators that plug into the lead, and it basically has a traffic light system that tells you whether the battery needs charging up. So it's sort of like a red, amber, green. I'll put a picture in the video. Okay, so the car itself, well, I would recommend, and this is my opinion, I'd recommend washing the car first, getting it absolutely clean before storing it. But don't make the drastic mistake of putting the car away immediately after it's been washed, because there'll be a lot of water that's trapped in various shut gaps under the bonnet, inside, maybe behind the headlights, things like that, and on the brakes, which will lead to corrosion. So wash the car. But then really what you want to be doing is leaving the car out for a couple of days, or maybe take it for a run around, get it fully warmed up, get all the water dried off. To be honest, I wouldn't be putting it in the garage for a couple of days. If I was planning to store it, I'd want that car absolutely bone dry before I put it in the garage. The other thing, you don't want water dripping on the floor after you've washed it and causing moisture. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I never put my car in the garage straight after I've washed it anyway, even if it's the summer, because I don't want water. I don't want the car to be standing in water. I don't want water dripping on the floor in the garage, because it can just lead to condensation and potentially corrosion. So yeah, I'd wash the car, but I'd make sure it was bone dry before it comes into the garage. So the next thing I'd be doing for long-term storage is I would be overinflating the tyres, probably be by about 10 to 15 psi extra into the tyres over the standard tyre pressure. Now there's a couple of good reasons for doing that. Number one, it will help prevent flat spots if the vehicle stood in the same place for a long time. And secondly, if you do need to roll the car out of your garage for whatever reason, maybe you need to get into some tools, or you might need to move the car out because you're working on the car or something like that, then the car will roll a lot easier when the tyres are really hard. So that's a good piece of advice to do. But make sure you leave yourself a little note on the steering wheel or inside the car to remind you to adjust your tyre pressures to the right PSI before you take the car back out onto the road. I'm planning to do a few jobs on my car over the winter, and what I'll try and do to do a lot of those is, if I need to move the car, I won't be starting the car up, because I don't want the engine to be on for a few seconds then back off again, because that will create moisture in the exhaust. I will roll the car or push the car around if I need to do the jobs on it. On that point, in the UK, our cars have to be taxed all year round to be legal to be used on the road. And I know a lot of people tend to decide to put their car on what we call a SORN, a statutory off-road notification, over the winter. So the point I'm making about starting the car up, if you're going to start the car up at all during this storage period, you need to go through a full heat cycle. Really the car needs to be taken out and given a good warming up. We have some lovely winter days here in the UK from time to time where the sun comes out, it's dry. That's an ideal time to take your classic out. You know, if you've got an older car that is tax exempt, for example, in the UK, then you know, if one of those days comes along, then take your car out, you know, get the oil around, moving around. But what you don't want to be doing is taking your car out when there's salt on the road, or if it's damp, because obviously that damp will get trapped on the car, and then when you put the car away, it could lead to corrosion. So if you are going to take your car out during the winter, choose your days wisely. But like I say, in the UK, we tend to, if we've got something that we are precious about or a classic car, chances are we tend to store them through the winter, because that means we don't have to pay the road tax. And that's what I'm planning to do with this one. I am planning to put a sawn on it for a couple of months, probably November, December, January, February as well. I may tax it again in March, I don't know, see what the weather's like, but definitely for about 4 months I'll be putting this car on a sawn while I do a few jobs that I need to do on the car as well at the same time. So yeah, get it out on a good sunny day where there's no salt on the road if you can. If not, you don't really want to be running that engine for just a few seconds, because it can create moisture in the engine and in the exhaust system. So I wouldn't advise that. Something else to mention about running engines during the storage period. On some vehicles, some of the older vehicles where they've got, for example, Bosch K-Jetronic, an old school fuel injection system that relies on mechanical parts and a mechanical fuel pump, those types of vehicles really do need running sort of every 6 to 8 weeks really during the winter period, because otherwise you could get problems with parts sticking in the injection system, and it could lead to problems. So some of them older classics, that's another reason to get them out on a nice sunny day during the winter, just to keep everything moving around, because of the way those injection systems are designed. It can lead to problems. Same for a carburettor, an old carburetted vehicle as well. Really, you know, for the fuel to sit in the carburettor, lots of rubber seals and things that could dry up, the float might stick, things like that. So some really old classic cars, I would recommend that if you do get the opportunity to give them a run out, because it might keep the engine going. A modern classic, they can't stand, but there are a couple of things that I would recommend if the vehicle is going to be standing for a long period of time. The other thing that you could do with an old classic car, not so much a modern classic like this one, but an old one, if you wanted to, during the winter period, you could disconnect the coil, crank the engine over until the oil pressure light goes out. So just crank it over on the battery. And what that'll do is that'll circulate some oil around the engine. So that's something that you could consider doing on an older car without actually starting it up, just cranking it over and getting the oil circulating. And that might be something that you might want to do before you actually bring the vehicle back into life after a long period of storage. Get the oil moving around, then connect the coil up and allow the engine to start. So now we've got the car all cleaned, dry and ready for the garage. What about dust covers or car covers? Would you recommend one of them, Paul? Well, me personally, I don't use them. I don't use them because I have a garage, and secondly, I don't use them because I'm not a fan of putting a cover over when I don't know if there might be a bit of dirt or some grit trapped under the cover, and then you drag the cover over the paintwork of the car and it could put a scratch on the car. If I was going to use one, I would probably use what a body shop uses when they've got cars in storage waiting to be painted or in the middle of being painted, which is a clear plastic, almost like a throwaway cover. I'll see if I can find a picture of one, I'll put one up in the video. But yeah, I actually prefer those throwaway covers than the more tailor-made covers, to be honest. I don't think it's necessary to put one on if you've got a garage. Plus, I like to come in the garage in the winter and see it and just think, yeah, that's my car and it's coming out again in the summer. You know, I do like to come in, and I know it sounds a bit sad. You petrol heads out there will know what I mean, but I like to come into the garage and have a bit of a look at it, or maybe even put a bit of wax on it or something like that, you know, or do a little job on the car. So I don't personally keep mine covered over. But there's nothing wrong with using a good quality cover if you've got one. If that's your thing, put it on. But just be careful, make sure there's no grit or anything trapped underneath the cover. What about soft top cars, convertibles? Well, before I got this Jag, the car I had before this, my hobby car, was a Porsche Boxster, one of the Mark 1 Porsche Boxsters, a 986. And my advice would be that you would keep the soft top up over the storage period. You don't really want to leave the roof folded down. So I know some people get a hard top, and I've seen them left on for long periods of time. But the problem then is, because the roof is folded up for a long period of time, it can get creases in it. So if you're storing a convertible, I would recommend that the roof is up, because that will keep it nice and taut and keep the fabric stretched. I tend to do this every time I put my car in the garage, but I always drop the windows down just a little bit, just to allow some air to circulate around the interior. You don't want stale air trapped in here for months on end. So yeah, it's a good idea to leave the windows down a bit, I think. What about changing the oil? You know, you hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, you should change the oil before you put a car into storage. I don't think that's actually necessary. The one I'd be worried about would be the coolant system. So yeah, it's important that the cooling system has good quality, or the correct antifreeze in it for the vehicle, and that it's at the maximum strength that it needs to be. What people don't realise sometimes is that the antifreeze is not just there to protect the water from freezing up inside the engine, it's also there to prevent corrosion. The antifreeze has corrosion inhibitors in it, and depending on what sort of engine structure you've got in the vehicle, so for example on this Jaguar here, the cylinder heads are aluminium. There's a lot of aluminium used around the engine, and the water that's inside there, if it wasn't the correct strength, and if it didn't have the correct corrosion inhibitors in there, then we could get some corrosion building up, which could be really bad for the insides of the engine. So my top tip would be to maintain your cooling system. You know, make sure your cooling system has the strongest coolant or antifreeze in there, or the strongest ratio that is available for your car, because especially if it's an older classic car as well, because sometimes with those having cast iron blocks, cast iron cylinder heads, there's more chance of rust building up inside the engine. So you really do want a strong antifreeze in there. I wouldn't necessarily worry about the engine oil. For me, I'll be changing the engine oil when I wake the car up and I get the car ready to be used in the summer. That's when I'll be doing an oil change. I wouldn't necessarily be doing it now before putting the car away for a few months' sleep. If you're wondering how to check your coolant, I do have a video in the Jaguar playlist where I talk about doing some under bonnet checks, and one of the ones is to check the coolant and check the strength of the coolant as well, using a hydrometer. So have a look for that video. I'll put a link in the description. One thing I definitely recommend is to fill the fuel tank up to the top max with the best fuel that's available in your area, you know, so super unleaded basically here in the UK. There's a couple of reasons to do that for storage purposes. The main reason is because there'll be no air left in the tank if it's full of petrol. If the tank is half empty or 3/4 empty, then there's a big void of air, and in that air there could be moisture, and that moisture will gather inside the fuel tank and potentially cause fuel contamination or other issues inside the tank. quite important if it's an old classic car as well with a steel fuel tank, because again it could lead to corrosion inside the fuel tank. So my top tip for storing a car for any period of time would be to fill the fuel tank right to the top. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that episode of Life on Cars today, where we talked all about storing your classic car. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up, give us a like. If you're new to the channel and you like what you've seen, have a look around the playlist. Might be something else that's interesting. Give me a subscribe as well if you haven't already done so. That would be fantastic. But I hope you liked listening to me giving you some of my advice on storing a car for the winter. To summarise, for me, the main takeouts: using a battery monitor device, that's certainly a top tip. Filling the fuel tank up with fuel as well, and making sure the car is as dry as it possibly can be when it's put away for storage. Everything else depends on your budget. You know, like I said, if I was building a garage from scratch, if any of you guys are builders and you want to build me a super fantastic garage, then get in touch. Maybe one day, yeah. But no, I'm lucky, I guess, to have what I have. I mean, some of you guys out there, you maybe don't have undercover storage, in which case you're probably going to be, if you are taking the car off, you're probably going to rely on an outdoor cover. So I guess I'm lucky in that department. But by God, it gets cold in here in the winter. So if I do move house in the future, I'll probably be looking to get a much better insulated garage than the one I've currently got. Anyway, hope you like watching the video. So take care, have a good week, and we'll see you again very soon with something else on Life on Cars. Bye bye now.